Testing 1 2 1 2. All right, we're going to get started. Thank you everybody for coming out. Welcome to the August installment of the Ember.js NYC meetup. A few items of business. This is August. We have a meetup scheduled for October 24th. It's going to be at Pivotal Labs, however, not this Pivotal Labs where we are today. Pivotal is moving next month to 6th Avenue and 18th Street. So we'll put the address and everything up when we get that finalized. But that date is set. However, they're moving during the month of September. So we would love to put on a meetup during September. If you have a space available that you know of, that you're interested in hosting, please talk to me. Requirements are be able to accommodate 50 to 75 plus people, hopefully provide pizza and beer, and AV equipment. We like to record these for the folks that are not in New York or can't make the meeting. And those all go up at our YouTube /Ember NYC page for those of you who want to check out some past meetups. So again, talk to me after if you have a space that might work for us for September. Covered that. So a couple of some news from around the Ember world. Ember 1.0 RC7 was released recently. There's a blog post that covers the changes. Ember 1.0 RC8 is scheduled to be released this weekend. So you can stay tuned for that one. Just a few other things that have been going on in the Ember repo, in case you're not aware, is that there's been a ton of work on Ember data going on. It's going on in a branch called J.J. Abrams. Don't ask me why it's called that. Reboot. Got it. And there's also been a big doc push that Trek has been spearheading on Ember Core. And I know a lot of people have contributed to that, perhaps even some folks here in this room. A personal plug, I have a talk that I submitted to South by Southwest Interactive for 2014 on Ember. The way that the talks for South by Southwest work is that there's a certain percentage of public vote. That public vote determines which talks are submitted or accepted. So if you feel up to it, doesn't matter if you're planning on attending South by Southwest or not, you can still vote. Go to panelpicker.southbysouthwest.com/votes, and you can just search for Ember or search for my name, and you'll find the thing to give a thumbs up right there. That'd be cool. And then I also wanted to highlight a recent contribution to Ember that I made that I think is pretty cool. And this is basically gives you a .on method similar to .property or .observes. And so as you can see in this example, this is particularly useful for if you're doing mix-ins that you want to mix into views. And you don't want to force somebody, you want to do something on did insert element, but you don't want to force somebody to call super if they're using your mixin. You can now define a method and say .on did insert element. And since did insert element is an event already on the class, this method will execute when that event is fired. So that's a way to take advantage of the built-in events, but you can of course use this for any events that you are firing in your own application that might be custom as well. This should be pretty useful. Another good use case is that observers don't fire on initialization of an object. If you want yours to fire, then you, in addition to observing the property you want to change, you could also say .on did init. This may change to on init. We're still talking about it, but we'll decide it before the next RC is cut. And then just last thing on this is that we're planning on enhancing this. Right now, it only works for event names on the current object. We're planning on enhancing it to support a property path, then .event name. So you could say on controller dot foo happened or whatever your event name might be. So that'll be useful as well. Anyway, this will be in RC8, and let me know what you think. If you have, yeah.
A way to use that doesn't rely on the function prototype change?
Good question. So Alex Machnier, sitting in the front row here, asks, is there a way to use this that does not rely on the function prototype extension? So, there are some folks for whom prototype extensions are a bad thing, and
I have a question. What is a prototype?
What is a prototype extension? So Stefan Penner over here in the back heckles and asks what's a prototype extension. JavaScript is quite a dynamic language, as you probably know, and you can add functions to almost any object. You can also add functions to the prototypes of objects, which means that all instances of that object will have that method. One of the types of objects whose prototype you can extend in this way is function itself, which is a little bit, but it's very powerful, and if you've used computed properties or the declarative observer syntax in Ember, you understand at least how to use this. Basically, after a function declaration, whether it's an anonymous function declared like so, or it's a function reference, maybe you assign this to a variable, you can then call .property, make it a computed property, or .on in this case. Because this changes the way that JavaScript itself works, some folks are concerned, some folks don't want that. It can also, there's potential for conflicts with other libraries. And so everything that you can do in Ember with prototype extensions also has a way to do it without prototype extensions. And the Ember test suite runs in both modes, with prototype extensions on and without, so that we can make sure we keep both ways working. In this case, it is Ember.on, event name function. And so you would say, in this example, do something with element : Ember.on, parentheses, did insert element, it's a string, comma, the function. And that would be functionally equivalent to the .on syntax. It also takes multiple event names. I'm not sure if there's a good use case for it, but it does. So with that, I'll just give you a preview of what's happening tonight. One of our scheduled demos is unfortunately not going to be able to happen because it requires some advanced medical-related equipment that can't be here this evening, because it is with somebody who is getting a deploy out. So we're going to reschedule that for September, hopefully perhaps October, and it'll be worth the wait. We are first going to have an international remote guest that I'm going to be Skyping in just a minute. Following that, we'll have John Allison doing a talk about Ember components, and then finally Tyler Love doing a talk about Bustle.com. I almost lost the new site, which is a brand new site that just launched, which is a content set that has super impressive performance. And Tyler's going to tell us how he did it and how he's dealing with SEO and a few other things. So with that, I want to first open the floor to announcements. Anything that any of you want to share, whether it's people hiring, people looking for an Ember job, other Ember events, et cetera. John Paul, anything you want to announce? Sure. We'll give you a mic here.
Thanks. On September 18th, the New York HTML5 Application Developers Meetup, which happens to be a very long name, but we're having a meetup that has a talk about an introductory talk by on Ember by Casey James, who he's usually at this meetup, but at the moment he's probably on his way or something. So hopefully see you there, September 18th, New York HTML5 Application Developers Meetup.
Awesome. Any other announcements?
So Tom Dell tweeted, I think about a couple days ago, about I just heard that MAG Labs is doing an Ember.js application using WebSockets to connect to big data using D3. and someone retweeted with hashtags in every single one of those words because like you can't be serious. That just seemed too trendy to be real. But it's actually real. I'm actually giving a talk at Couchbase conference in San Francisco, showing how we can use Ember.js and WebSocket to expose continuous analytics. That is, data being pumped in the Couchbase, and we have a model that essentially update each tier of aggregates. Think of Excel, except scalable. And the way we're going to update the UI is using WebSockets, updating Ember model. Ember model then will bind to D3 visualization. And what we're doing is baseball analysis on the hardness of a player and the win above replacement value. So as you pump the hits data and win data, you can see people coming up in one quadrant, which is not very good player, but very hot recently. Alfonso Sorani will be a good example of that. But then there is some player who never gets hot, but is always high, and there will be another quadrant. It will be very cool to see that visualization. I'm working with Yap Labs to do some of this work on the front end, and we are working with people who like playing with NoSQL and Couchbase to do that. I'm looking for someone who knows D3 that wants to work on this, and this entire baseball analysis project will be open sourced on the day of the Couchbase conference on September 13 in San Francisco. So if anybody either knows someone in the HTML5 community that wants to hack with us next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're just going to get it done. We're just going to get it done. Either talk to me or Luke, and then we'd love to have you guys. We're learning D3, but we're not experts in it. But if you know how to do it and how to get Alex Rodriguez's face to show up when you mouse over something, that would be really awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Chris. That was Christopher C. from MHE Labs. DB?
Thanks. I got a new open source project called Tribute. It's something that looks a little bit like Travis CI in terms of infrastructure. There's the Ember front end and the Ruby back end. And the idea is to create a badge on GitHub pages that where you can say that you are using a certain project or maybe part of a team or yourself. So it's completely free, open source, and all that. I'm looking to pair with a mid-level Ember developer to build the front end, and I can do all of the back-end stuff. I'm just going too slow and don't find enough time to do it. So if you have good experience with Ember and want to code, you have copies, free time, come find me after that.
Cool. Thanks, DB. I'm glad that Chris mentioned Yap Labs because I want to make sure that I thank our sponsors. First, Pivotal, who's hosting us here tonight, who's provided the pizza and the beer, and has been hosting us for over a year now. We're very grateful to Pivotal. Pivotal, for those of you who don't know, is a consultancy, an agile consultancy specializing in Rails, JavaScript, iOS, probably a bunch more technologies as well. I know they do a little bit of Ember, some other JavaScript frameworks too. If you are interested in either hiring Pivotal for a project or potentially working at Pivotal, you should talk to Micah Young, who's standing in the back with his hand up. Mike is also volunteering to do with our AV tonight. So thank you, Micah, and thank you, Pivotal. And then our other sponsor is Yap Labs, which is my company. Yap and Yap Labs are work together to both produce a consumer product to allow consumers to create mobile applications, as well as do Ember consulting. So if any of that interests you, feel free to talk to me too. The other thing that I didn't mention is that after talks, we will be going to a nearby bar to continue the chatter over some beers. Everyone is welcome. With that, we're going to get into our program, unless there are any other announcements. Okay, awesome. So let's see what we can do here. Well, hello there, Gavin, Joyce.
Hello.
It's New York calling.
Well, hello, New York.
Hey, Micah, would you hit the lights so get a little more darkness up front? So, Gavin, do you want to tell folks here in New York, we've got a room full of, I don't know, probably about 60, 70 folks here at the Ember.js meetup. Who are you and what do you do and why are we talking to you from Dublin, Ireland?
Well, let's see. I've been programming for maybe 16 years, .NET, Ruby, JavaScript. I've been heavily involved in the Ruby community in Dublin for the last maybe 8 years. And early this week, I gave a presentation on Ember.js to the Ruby Ireland, where there was a lot of interest. So I was just thinking of a sample app to build last week, something other than a to-do app. There's probably enough of them out there. So I thought a drum machine would be a bit of fun to build, and yeah, it was a bit of fun.
Wait, so you're gonna remote demo this from across the ocean? Is that that's the plan here?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Let me just switch the screen.
Cool.
How's that?
Give it a second. We can see it.
Okay, great. So this is the application here. It's very simple. Emberbeats.gavinjoyce.com. It's up on GitHub as well. So let's see. What we're looking at here is a song. There's a controller at the top, which has some actions like a play and stop. So I can play it here. And you see it's cycling through this pattern in the drum machine. We can cycle up and down through the beats per minute. Something to note is that if you have a look at the URL, as I actually change the state of the song, the URL updates. So this is where I'm actually persisting the state of the song. So you can see that if I take the URL and load it in a new browser window, it has that exact state. So it's a nice way to, without a backend or whatever, it's just a small bit of data. It's very easy for people to just share these songs to Twitter or whatever, and their patterns are in the URL. So let's see. This here displays, on the very right, it's 16ths, then beats and bars, so they're musical terms. In terms of these little boxes are 16ths. This is set up in a 4/4 pattern in musical terms, and each box is a 16th. 4/16ths is beat, and let me change the song actually. And you'll see the 4 different colors are 4 bars. So you see if I press play here, you see this updating in real time.
Cool.
Let's see, there's some options to share a song. There's some preset songs, which are just links to URLs. Let's see, we can cycle between different sounds. These individual hits, they have 3 states. Basically, the velocity of the strength of the sound that's going to come from them. And we can update them in real time as it's playing. Let's see, a couple other things. We can obviously remove channels, add steps, remove steps, things like that. So it's quite a simple application, but yeah, it's a little bit of fun, and I think it works reasonably well.
Nice. Tell us about why Ember. Why did you decide to build this in Ember, and how how hard or easy was it?
Okay, well, I built a few applications with SproutCore a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, I moved away from it for a little while, and then I joined Zendesk at the start of this year, and they obviously do a lot of Ember, and the main front-end application is quite a large Ember application. So that got me back into Ember, and since then I've just I think the documentation's got a lot better. It's a lot more consistent than it was. I think it's easier to get up and running. So there has been a renewed interest in Dublin about Ember, and I'm starting a Ember Dublin meetup group, and we have about 100 people who have joined that group already.
Cool.
So we're hoping to do some cool things there.
Awesome. And do you want to show any code for this? Is there any particular code
sure,
that might be interesting?
Let's see. Okay, so this top bar here is backed by a playback controller. Is that text okay?
Yeah, we're seeing the browser right now. There we go.
Okay, it's probably a few seconds lag. How's that?
Yeah, just pop it up a few notches. Maybe 2 more font sizes.
Okay.
That's pretty good. Good.
Okay, cool. So there's a number of computer properties here which represent 16ths, beats, and bars. The main heartbeat of the application is this tick count. So it's just a number that increments when you press start. And there is a tick function which increments the property. I have this little, because it's audio and I want to reduce latency as much as possible, I just implemented a kind of pub sub mechanism where I can publish an event and very quickly bypass, callbacks or the Ember run loop and things like that, and just go straight to simple pub sub. So I published the tick end, and anything that's interested can subscribe to that. And this just calls tick again. So there's not a huge amount there. The sound player is interesting, actually. It kind of it uses a library called Howler. And just like a CSS sprite for images, you can give it an audio file, and that audio file can have individual sprites. So all of the sounds that are playing are actually sounds from a classic Roland 808 drum machine.
Oh, cool.
And they're just represented here in a single MP3, so I think that's quite good in terms of performance. In terms of the actual persisting the state to the URL, the models themselves have a last updated property, which just returns a date, but it's just a mechanism that I can, if I show this is the object model here. So there's a song, and a song has multiple channels, and a channel has multiple steps. And basically anytime any of these, the state of these are key things that I care about in the URL change, that change propagates up to the song, using this kind of last updated just as a hook. And the song itself does things like uses a compression library, so it serializes the JSON, compresses the base 64, and then encodes it. URI encodes it for the URL, and then does the reverse when the application is loaded for the first time. So other than that, it's just a very simple Ember application. I don't think there's anything other than that that's that interesting. I'm sure you've seen lots of Ember applications at this stage.
Very cool. That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing this. Any other notes for the New York audience here? Anything else you want to share?
No. Have a good night.
Awesome. Any plans to come visit us here?
I hope you're drinking beer there, are you?
Anybody have a beer here? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have one here as well. Good. No plans at the moment. I've been over to San Francisco quite a few times this year with Zendesk. But I'm sure I'll get over.
Awesome.
Soon enough.
We'd love to have you out to a meetup and buy you a drink.
Great.
All right. Cool.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Oh yeah. Hold on. Let me show you the crowd. Let's see. There we go. We're awesome. Any questions for Gavin from the audience before we let him go? Cool. All right. This was awesome. Let's give Gavin a hand. Good stuff, my man. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Be well. All right. That was the first international guest of an Ember.js NYC event. Come on up, John. Give you this. Had folks seen that the Ember Beats thing before? Show of hands, anybody? Cool. Yeah, I saw it in Ember Watch. So if you don't, or was it Ember Weekly? I can't remember. If you don't subscribe, there's a couple of good newsletters for news in the Ember world. Ember Watch is one of them. That's good stuff. So our next speaker is a good friend of mine who is running a company called Customer.io. And Customer.io lets you do behavioral. I'm going to butcher the pitch. You can do a better elevator pitch than I can, and I hope that you do, John. But it basically lets you send the right email to the right user at the right time for your web-based business. We're using it at Yap. It's awesome, and the entire front end is written in Ember. So John's going to talk to us a little bit tonight about how they've adopted the new Ember component functionality that dropped not too long ago and what kind of difference it's made in their code base. So John Allison.
Do you know how to switch the keynote? So if I hit play, it's reversed. I can just mirror it, I think. Sweet. Okay, so thanks for the intro, Luke. I'm going to talk about Ember components, which is a pretty new addition to Ember. I think it was launched in release candidate 6, and we're on 7, and 8's coming out pretty soon. I'm John Allison. This is actually a picture of our company retreat last week in the Catskills. So I like grilling and hanging out by the lake. It was a great experience if you have a small team or company. Just go out somewhere with internet, but nothing else, and it's great fun. So. Companies customer I/O, like Luke said, we do complex marketing campaigns based on user behavior. So you can set things up like 3 days after a user signs up and adds a bunch of widgets, but they haven't paid, send an email, that type of thing. We've been using Ember in production for over a year, last summer, and Ember's been moving fast. We have a bunch of bumps and bruises, but we really like where the framework's going, and we're still here. So, so what is an Ember component? It's a good question. Tom Dell describes it like this. This is a tweet a few weeks ago. I don't know Angular, but I still thought it was funny. If you know Angular, then you can describe what that means. I don't know. Well, taking a step back, few of the problems that we've always wanted to do better with Ember is, simplify our view logic. At this point, I think our Ember app's pretty big. We have like 40-something controllers, and that's significant to me because 5 years ago, I moved to New York to work at the company Luke was running, WePlay. And before that, the largest Ember app I worked on was like 5 controllers. And I opened up WePlay's app for the first time, had like 50-something. I was floored. So it's pretty big. So we're getting up there now. And just being able to reuse common things. So across all these controllers, views, everything, there's a lot of things that you'd want to share pretty generically across the app to reduce duplication, things like that. So every time we tried to do that, we ran into pain. And for a variety of reasons. And Ember provides a lot of view logic that is helpful in certain situations. But I feel like a lot of time they're not really there for making generic reusable components, which is why I really like components, the new Ember components. So an example from our app, we use these lists, paginated lists, a bunch of different areas in our application. They all have different columns. Sometimes they show column headers, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're infinite, sometimes they're paged. All kinds of different ways. And we didn't want to have to rebuild this every time. So we went through a few different ways of kind of extracting this, both presentation, like HTML and CSS, as well as behavior that happens. So when you press the next button, or the next page button, things happen consistently. So we went through all the different options that Ember provides to figure out if it's a good fit for kind of pulling this out of our code base. And these are all kind of listed from low level to high level. This one is probably the lowest level. I don't recommend it, but you can define your own handlebars helpers. This is a simplified version based off like the my link to or whatever. But basically, you can define a helper, register a helper, and you can call a view. So the last line of this helper, I'm instantiating my helper view and calling it. And that'll render in the place of the helper. And below is like how you would use it. And so I've done this once. It's really hard to understand the context and everything that's going on. So unless you really need low-level control, I would not do it. Partials are in Ember now. So you can extract parts of your view and put them in a different file or a different handlebars script tag. And this is great for simplifying your view, but you really can't do any. You can't really encapsulate any behavior here. The context is shared with the overall view, and you have to define any like events or clicks on that overall view. Shared views. This is kind of what we end up doing. This is a simplified code of how it works. But basically, you tell it to render a view in this spot. You can pass some parameters, and there's block level syntax, so you can actually render stuff inside of it. And so what this is actually doing, because you just have a view, you can encapsulate behavior with events, encapsulate presentation templates. But it's harder to get that full picture, like the whole MVC type structure that Ember provides regularly through routes. And I think the other objects that are behind this view is like there's a state manager, controller, and maybe one more. I don't remember what it was. And you have to manage all that, manually create those things, instantiate them when this view is inserted. So you need to have a lot of low-level knowledge. This is kind of the actual template for the shared view. And it does share the context with the parent view, so you have to make sure if you want to reuse this in a generic way that you're only accessing data that your view should have, which can be hard at times. So you notice there's a lot of like view dot collection, view dot header context, that type of stuff to make sure that we're staying within our shared boundaries. So relatively new for us, this wasn't around when we actually did the shared view, but if it was, I probably would have done this. What render does is allow you to, in a view, say, render this object. Which is general to how the route works. It'll set up the controller for you, the view, and you pass in the model. So you have the full suite of what you're normally used to working with Ember. And this is great. I think it would have been a big improvement to switch to this. One of the things that is a little harder to use this for is generic components that don't really need an actual model. Maybe you're just passing a data that you've generated in your parent controller, but you just wanted to do something special with that. That's a little heavyweight for that case, and it's not as flexible. You can really only pass in the model, a certain model for it, and it's tied to that model type usually. So RC6 Ember components was released. The way I describe it is basically just a pure self-contained view. I believe it inherits from a view, the actual Ember view object. Sets the context to itself, essentially, and you don't have access to anything outside of it. There's a custom element spec in W3C, so this will be coming to your browser someday, where you can define your own HTML elements, which sounds really cool. And the goal of the Ember maintainers is to keep it as close to the spec as possible so that you, when these things become well used from browser vendors, you can convert your Ember components to natural custom elements and use them anywhere in your app, not just in Ember. So building components, part of the retreat was high-level custom stuff, company stuff, but also working through a new refresh of our UI and updating our Ember skills, writing some Golang. If anyone's into Golang, I'm a new convert, so talk to me later. But this is one aspect of our new interface that we're working on. And the thing that I notice here that's really perfect for a component is all these spark lines. So all it needs to know how to do is take a string of data, maybe a label, and render that. It doesn't need to know that it's part of a campaign or what type of data it is or anything like that. So I saw this screenshot when we were working on the UI and was like, we need a way to better encapsulate that than we've done in Ember before to really make it nice. And so the way you may do this is the template for the component on the top. And you can notice the data template name is prefixed by component / and then spark dash line. So Ember uses the component / to know that it's a component. The dash is a part of the W3C spec, I believe, so that it can tell the difference between a component and a normal HTML element. But I don't think it's totally necessary at the moment in Ember. It's just good for if you want to convert them later on, I guess. So the code inside this template, all you have access to is the stuff you pass into the actual component in your view. So this second line is in some other view. And using the example screenshot, I'm going to create a spark line for all the clicks, give it a time series, click data, and give it an average maybe. Or maybe it can calculate that from the time series, whatever. And then it can display that itself. So that's great for presentation. You can also create the component if you want to customize the behavior. So in this case, we want to create that graph from the time series data. And you may set up D3 when the view is instantiated or the component's instantiated. And since this is really just a view, you can customize it however you want. You can add classes. You can change the tag name, anything like you would normally with an Ember view. Yeah, so that's it. You can also easily do blocks. So if you do yield in your component, in your parent view, you can use data inside of it. And the special thing about this is the actual component itself only has access to the title which you passed in, but the block that you're writing out is using the context of the parent view. So in this case, post is an object in the parent view context, but you can use that and render it inside the blog post. You don't have to pass it in and then use it. So it's a nice feature where you can use this wrapper wherever you want. And that's it. I'm JR Allison at Twitter, John at Customer.io. We're hiring Ember people. Or if you're not an Ember person, we have a lot of data. So if you like data, we'll talk to you too. That's
awesome. Thanks, John. Questions before you disconnect? Questions for John? Let me pass the mic over so we can get the question on for the people at home.
Okay, so how do you distinguish between a handlebars helper and a component? Because they both start with the mustache tag and whatnot. So.
Yeah, good question. So you can do anything you want in a handlebars helper. And in that case, the thing I was showing, you're instantiating a view or creating a new view and displaying whatever the view said. So in that way, it can be the same. You have to do a whole lot extra work to do a helper if you're just using it in that case. The classic example of a helper are things more low level, like all the way you render a partial or render something or render a view. Those are all handlebar helpers that are like a step below your normal Ember objects.
Was your question about how Ember distinguishes between double curly brace, some text, whether that's going to be a helper or a component? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure too much about how Ember recognizes either one.
Steph, you know the answer to that?
So the first thing to realize is that components are specialized views, and the way that they're rendered is kind of as a handlebar helper. So they're really a union of the two to make them fairly simple. Currently, components are only loaded if their template name has a dash in it, and they get registered at the beginning of your application. So the way going forward, ideally, is to make sure that there's a dash in the component name. There could still be collisions where you have a handlebar helper named exactly the same thing as a component. There's nothing to prevent that from occurring. Does that answer your question?
Cool. Other questions for John? I've got one. I don't know if you know the answer about if using an action helper inside of Ember component.
Oh, yeah. So there's yeah, I got a mic here. There's a few differences between a view and a component, mainly for isolating the view itself. So, like I said, the context is very isolated. You don't have access to anything outside of it. And any actions, so Ember has this concept of actions, which you can add to an element. For instance, an example would be like a click. If you clicked on a div element, you can specify an Ember action for that div, and that'll fire a click event throughout your application. And typically how that works is it'll bubble up through your Ember application, so your view, and then up through the change, up to like the top level application. For a component, an action will just exist inside the component itself. So it's, you aren't able to listen to it above the component. It's just any actions inside the component just go straight to the component object that you would customize.
And the component, there's a way for the component to choose to bubble that out, but by default, the action is not going to go anywhere unless you explicitly do that in the component code. Any other questions? Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much, John.
Yep.
So while Tyler's getting set up, I just want to invite everybody to stand up, stretch, and say hello to somebody that you don't know who's sitting near you. I'm going to quiz a random person. So. Also, if you need another drink, I think there's some more pizza back there too.
You go use the restroom real quick. Sort of mute on this guy.
Hey, how's it going? I'm Luke.
Good, bro.
Nice to meet you, Gilbert. Yeah.
First time around.
First time? Oh, awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad you can make it. I'll find something here. Well done. Thank you. Yeah.
I met somebody new.
All right, good, good. But you want to press the button just in the top center. All right, Alex, good to see you, man. Good to see you soon. Sorry, it's the one right in there.
Oh.
Cool.
Hello.
All right, everybody, find your seat. We're going to get rolling. We have one more talk tonight. And before we get rolling, I want to just ask somebody, DB, who did you meet, sir?
I met one of your interns, apprentices. I've already forgot his name. Irvin.
Irvin's on. For those of you who were here last month, Irvin did his first professional presentation, software presentation. It was awesome, and it was even called out with its own headline in Ember Watch or Ember Weekly. I can't remember which. So our next speaker had a site that launched to some acclaim recently, and it's the first I had heard of it. It's awesome that you guys are here in New York. But Tyler's no stranger to working on some high-profile sites. He's worked on Tumblr and Bleacher Report in the past, and I think there's a good chance that Bustle is going to also be a pretty high-profile site. He's going to take you through a demo, as well as talk to you about how he built it, some of the challenges, and talk about a question that I've been asked personally probably a dozen times at different meetups over the last year, which is, how do you deal with SEO and JavaScript MVC? So with that, Tyler Love.
Hello. So I'll start with a little background on what Bustle is. Bustle is a web publication aimed at the female demographic. Our editorial staff makes an effort to cover everything going on in news, entertainment, fashion and beauty, lifestyle, and books. So our content is written, published, and curated by a team of 30-plus freelance writers, 6 full-time editors, and we're growing that team really quickly. Currently, we publish between 40 and 80 articles every day, and with the goal of doubling it by the end of the year. And on the tech side, our objective is to make the best possible publishing tools for writers and editors, as well as the best web publication for our readers. So Bustle had a really well-defined product scope, and that enabled us to make some bold decisions about the tech being used. And since we knew there wasn't going to be scope creep, we got to take a simple, often overlooked problem of engineering a CMS and content site and build it with something futuristic like Ember. And I guess I'll go over some of the components of building the 4 different tech components we have, which the first is our CMS titled Lovelace. It's built entirely in Ember. The templates are mostly in Bootstrap. It's got a responsive design. It's usable on mobile, and we took a lot of care to make sure this was a self-contained CMS and something we can install and configure in other environments. And that also means the code base is totally separate from bustle.com itself. I have a couple of screenshots, but I'll give you guys a demo in a second. So bustle.com itself is also an Ember app, responsive layout, should look good on pretty much any screen size. And it talks to the same API as a CMS. If you guys want to browse the site and check it out for yourselves, you should. I think it feels really snappy, and it's good to see what an Ember app can do. So let me pull up a demo, and I'll just browse around for you guys. This is the home page. So clicking between articles and sections should be really fast. The way that we're actually accomplishing this is there's a API for every one of these URLs, and we're loading most of the article data. And then you'll see there's a little loader over here, and we get some of the related article data sort of after the fact. And we've done a lot of stuff on the back end to optimize the response times on that. And we also have like a really nice search feature. It's kind of got equal speeds going around. And let's see, on the CMS side of things, this is what our writers and editors spend a lot of time looking at. And right now, we're really producing 2 different types of content, articles and slideshows. I'll just show you guys what it's like to quickly write a terrible article. We're using the Getty Images API to get their editorial photos. We're actually trying to work with some other stock photography providers so we can get some more like creative options and hopefully improve the look of the site. We've got stuff like Twitter embeds. Also, WYSIWYGs are like the worst software ever written, and they're really hard to work with. We've got Ember validations and stuff. I don't know. It's pretty straightforward. So now it's taking the photo, licensing it from Getty, and you'll see that it pops into this publishing queue. And this is what our editors are really spending a lot of time to go in and out of the content, do the writing, and figure out, what content there is. You can see that there's filters. We have a pretty robust search tool, which is using Sphinx. And so the way that you would actually go and place content on the site is, this is very much in the works, but you can see if I want to add something to the homepage carousel, I see my article here, hit save, and if I go back to the homepage, I'm on staging. We should see that article sitting there. So the idea is it's really easy for our editors and writers to go around and place content, write content, edit content, and we're planning on expanding this and adding lots of features to make it really easy to build like a great publishing software. And using Ember has made this like, it actually was really hard, but it was great. So, all right, back to these slides here. So those are the first two components. The actual app it's a Rails app. We primarily just use it to host the API. And the only exception to that is that we're detecting certain URLs like the sections and the articles. And if you're actually coming straight to it, we're injecting the preloaded JSON data, so we don't have to make a subsequent API request. This is exactly what Discourse does to optimize like initial page loads. It's hosted on a mix of Heroku and some self-hosted EC2 instances. Our primary data store is actually Redis, which has helped immensely with some of the response times on the API. And the only exception to that is Postgres for the users table, because there's really great user tools for Rails, and none of them seem to work with Redis as of yet. Most of our data is indexed using Sphinx real-time indexes, which provides us really great search functionalities. We have Google-like operators on all the search, a bunch of fun stuff like that. And as a whole, this is what it looks like. You can see we have our Lovelace app, Bustle app. We are pretty standard stack. Not a whole lot to explain there. We do have the queue and scheduler, and this is segueing into how we're doing some of the SEO stuff and making our site crawlable. So sometimes posts are scheduled. We use our queue to publish the scheduled posts when the writers decide they need to go out. There's a bunch of background jobs and external API requests. We run through that. And of course, we use it for rendering and storing a cache of pretty much all of the content on our site. And that's what we serve to crawlers. So one of the most difficult parts about building a content site as a single-page JavaScript app is addressing the crawlability. And we needed to figure out a way for not only the Googlebot, but Twitterbot and Facebook crawlers to see our content in the same way that our readers do. And as you can imagine, not having this would have adverse effects on shareability, search traffic referrals, and so on for a content site. I actually took 3 different approaches to trying to solve this problem, and I'm going to outline sort of the goods and the bads of each one. My first attempt was to create server-side rendered versions of every page that we direct the crawlers to. The upside to this approach was its simplicity, just serve basic Rails views when we detect a crawler. We can even optimize the DOM structure, making it easier for the crawlers to parse. Unfortunately, this is a really bad idea. Google and other search indexes call this cloaking, and it'll get you banned from search engines. While it's not explicit what Google considers as cloaking, it's clear that they want you serving their crawlers the same thing you send to users. So attempt 2 was to use no-script tags, similar to what Discourse does. And everyone is familiar with Discourse at this point. While this approach initially worked fine, it gives you far less control over what the crawlers see and how they interpret it. No-script tags are oftentimes ignored. It might be fine for basic Google search results, but it fails at some of the conventions crawlers and bots want implemented outside of that. It also imposes that you provide extra data for all your pages, increasing page size, bandwidth usage, likely affecting server-side performance if you're rendering any kind of DOM structure in that. And although probably not by much, the general consensus is it's less favorable for SEO. So the third attempt was using a more robust solution by taking Phantom.js snapshots of our pages and storing them in a cache. And for those unfamiliar with Phantom.js, it's a headless version of WebKit that you control through a JavaScript API. We use it to fetch pages from Bustle and get fully rendered DOM back from the app. So we aren't the first people to think of this. There's actually other talks that outline some of these things. But when I was doing some digging on how we were going to really figure out our SEO, I found brombone.com. And software as a service, you pay them a monthly fee. It's pretty cheap, except that the cache is stored on a CDN that you have to fetch from your app, which is kind of bad if you need to make a GET request whenever you're trying to send something to a crawler. It's also, they rely on your sitemap, which it's kind of hard to either have to create an entirely different sitemap for them because you don't actually want crawlers to see your sitemap before the content has been rendered and cached. And so there's also SEO server, which looks really well maintained, but it didn't really fit into our server-side stack because it's more of a JavaScript app. And we just wanted to do our own thing. So our in-house system looks something like this. Whenever there are changes to any content on our site, we send a Phantom render job to our rescue queue to refresh a page snapshot. We also use our scheduler to periodically re-render our highly crawled pages to make sure the cache is never stale. Primarily, this is our home page and our section pages. When we do detect a request coming from a crawler, we send them the Phantom.js snapshot, which is served straight from a Redis cache, complete with fully rendered DOM that was generated by Ember, and that includes all of the beautiful metamorph tags you get. If you're curious to see what this looks like, you can actually just curl bustle.com, and as you can see, I'll detect that and send you the same thing a Google crawler would see. And I need a drink of beer. So one of the other difficulties with the Phantom.js snapshot approach is that our pages still need to be search engine optimized. A typical website will set titles, descriptions, meta tags, DOM structures tailored to various crawlers. For example, Facebook OG meta tags, Twitter card API meta tags, Google structured data, and like a dozen other things that you want to consider when you're really trying to optimize SEO on your site. So my coworker Garth built an internal tool called the Meta Manager. Its role in our app is injecting all of the SEO goodness you'd want the crawler to see without adding meta tag injections all over your app. Instead, you simply just pass meta information for the current state, and it handles readying the DOM for the crawlers and the bots. all we actually had to do to implement this was hook it into the Ember router. And it made it really, really easy to fine-tune the crawler settings for each of our routes in the Ember app. And I guess the last talking point is understanding how escaped fragment worked. What do I have to say? Escape fragment was introduced by Google as a way of telling a Google crawler how to fetch content for sites that use AJAX and the hashbang. And all you have to do is declare a meta tag with the name fragment in your HTML document head. And by doing that, you're opting into their AJAX crawling scheme. So when Google sees this meta tag, it tells the crawler to make a subsequent request with an escaped fragment query string appended to the original URL it was trying to access. And this makes the Googlebot detection really easy on the server side. Bing and a couple of other crawlers have actually started to implement this. So as long as you support this, you really get a lot of SEO optimization for free. And I think that's all I've got for how to do SEO stuff in your Ember app. It's hard to do this without Garth, who actually wrote a lot of our Ember apps, both the CMS and Bustle itself. And RJ, who's responsible for all the product and making sure the site looks as sort of elegant and simplified as it does. And you should also check out our open source project, Ember Restless. When we started this project 6 or 7 months ago, Ember data was not in a good enough place to build something this ambitious. And we ended up doing something in-house that really simplified getting an Ember app off the ground and not having to deal with a bunch of really complex relational issues that Ember data introduces. And that's all I got.
Let's take some questions. DB.
So you use escaped fragment for just knowing that it's a crawler and then serve the same content, or do you serve any different content?
We actually take a lot of care to make sure we serve exactly the same content that the fully rendered Ember app page would share. And that's really to avoid, Google is actually doing, they'll crawl your site and they'll see what's there, but they're also seeing what happens after JavaScript. And we spoke to a couple of guys there, and we just want to play by the rules and make sure we're giving them exactly the same thing our users see. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's just one line of code in that is crawler, and that's it, right?
Yeah, I think you can actually, that's in my app controller right there. So that's all the detecting I actually do. A lot of crawlers also just have the URL. So if there's an HTTP, I just detect that and send them the static thing too.
Yes, so if you do a view source on the front page and notice there's a Bustle data kind of embedded, is that for SEO or performance, or?
That's for performance. That's the preloaded data. So we don't have to make that API request after the fact. The Rails app detects if that page has something that it can just inject into the template it serves. And then we're actually playing around with that because that introduces another performance issue. Those JSON objects are huge. And so we're actually wondering if the perceived load time would be better without that and doing the API requests. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but we also wanted to approach, we started thinking about this recently, but sending all of our users the pre-rendered version that we're caching, the same thing we send to crawlers. And this is so we can just send them the DOM, and it's already been rendered server-side, so we don't have to even send them any of that JSON data. And that would probably be the most optimized way. But it introduces a bunch of weird problems about how different browsers render Ember templates a little bit differently. So it seems like a little bit of a rabbit hole, but could potentially be the most optimized way to serve our content.
Other questions?
Any particularly interesting challenges with the WYSIWYG editor? Is that something that you implemented yourself, or is that like a library that's...
We're using what you see as HTML5.
Got it, okay.
And just using it was incredibly difficult. It lies about a lot of the callbacks it supplies, so like all the on-change events don't actually work the way you would anticipate. So we're doing all kinds of weird things where we check like 10 different things to even determine if the content has been changed, because you get in all these weird, is this model dirty or not? And sometimes it wasn't updating, and people would hit save. It wouldn't actually post because the model didn't get dirtied. A bunch of really awful stuff around that.
Thanks.
I got a quick question. In terms of the Phantom.js rendering, how long does it take to render one page?
So I'm doing it a little bit of a lazy way, where I am actually shelling out. I found a binary that would run on Heroku, and I put that into our app directory, which gets deployed, and then I shell out. You can actually add it to your path on Heroku. So I shell out a command, and it actually runs faster on Heroku than on my laptop, but it takes anywhere from maybe like a half a second to a few seconds, depending on what's going on in the queue. Fast enough that it hasn't been a hurdle yet.
Gotcha. Cool.
If you want to push that further, you can keep the Phantom process running.
Yeah.
And
You can have Phantom run as a server, essentially, and just pipe its stuff, and it can handle a moderate amount of concurrency by itself.
Yeah, we had a bunch of issues with that, with it receiving sig kills and stuff like that when we would restart our Ember app. I did look into it, but there was like a whole other challenge to face by getting that to work. Fortunately, that we're only producing anywhere from 80 articles a day right now, so we're not really like getting a backlog in the queue that we have to worry about just yet, but that would be the most optimized way to do it.
Have you noticed any issue? So Phantom isn't actually a real, it is an old WebKit that is actually not used by any browser that you use. Have you noticed any fun or strange things that maybe deliver something strange to your search engines that normal users would never encounter?
I was actually in a panic about an hour or two ago with just this problem. It was having issues with the actual JSON data that it spits out. So it shells out and returns a JSON object that gets built. And it gives me the response code and all the things you need to know if the success to our app actually is giving us the result we want. And we're getting lots of weird illegal syntax errors that we can't actually debug because there's no other information about it. And the JSON we get back seems to be fine, but for whatever reason, Phantom.js is giving us like this really odd, it's just saying syntax error. So if you know anything about that, I'd love to talk.
If you get me a beer.
All right.
This talent is for sale for alcohol. John Paul.
So I think I'm confused about what cloaking is. So how does this? So you use Phantom.js to basically scrape the post-rendered Ember app to get your HTML, but that's not the same as what you would get for view source. Is that not what they? What do they care about? I guess.
It's a black box, and we do know that they have this escape fragment convention that is to tell them that this is the real Ajax page, and from just some Googling around, it sounds like Google actually does render your page by executing all the JavaScript. So we're just giving them the exact same thing they would see if they are rendering the page.
I guess what's the difference between the third point and the first option, the third option and the first option?
We were rendering something that didn't reflect the DOM at all that we're sending to end users. We were just writing a template with, title, description, here's the title of the article, here's the image, and here's the body, and kind of optimizing for it to be easy to parse, but we weren't actually reproducing what the DOM structure would look like from Ember.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Awesome. That was great. Thank you so much, Tyler. So we are going to go for drinks at Central Bar, which is on East 9th between 3rd and 4th, just a couple of blocks, a few blocks from here. Encourage you to join us, and if there's folks here that you don't know yet, introduce yourself, buy them a beer, or get bought a beer, and other than that, stay tuned on the mailing list, and I will let you know what we figure out for September. And we'll be back in Pivotal's new space in October. So again, thanks to Pivotal for hosting, Yap for sponsoring, and to Gavin, Joyce in Dublin, Ireland, to John Allison, and to Tyler Love for being our speakers tonight. Thanks, everybody.